My phone rang at 2:38 in the morning. I was already awake. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, in the dark, for 40 minutes, with a cup of tea that had gone cold, watching the light on the White Mud River frozen flat below the window, thinking about what Patricia had filed 4 hours earlier. The name on the screen was Ray Kowalski. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Douglas. His voice was low. The kind of voice men use when they're in a house where other people are sleeping, and what they're about to say can't wait until morning. I need to tell you something. About Marcus. About what he's Ray, I said. Just listen. He's planning to Ray. He stopped. I know, I said. It's already done. Silence. Then what do you mean done? My lawyer filed at 5:47 p.m. today. The board received notice at 6:12 p.m. Marcus received notice at 7:04 p.m. I looked at the frozen river. He knows. A longer silence. Good God, Ray said. Go back to sleep, I said. Thank you for calling. I hung up, turned off the phone, poured the cold tea down the sink. Then I stood at the window for a while watching the river, and thought about how a thing that takes 3 years to build can come apart in a single afternoon, if you've been patient enough to prepare for it. My name is Douglas Whitaker. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the Alberta provincial government. Roads, bridges, water treatment. The kind of infrastructure that people use every day without thinking about who designed it. I retired at 63 with a pension, a clean record, and absolutely no interest in slowing down. My wife June died 2 years before I retired. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from the first symptom to the end. We'd been married 38 years, and I spent every one of those 8 weeks by her bedside, trying to memorize the exact sound of her laugh before it was gone. After June, I sold the house in Glenora and moved into a smaller place in Riverdale, on the North Saskatchewan. Lower maintenance, better view. I could walk to the market on Tuesday mornings and be back before 9. I had savings, not extravagant wealth. A civil servant's pension is what it is, but I had the proceeds from the Glenora house, June's life insurance, and a conservatively managed investment account that Patricia's firm had maintained for 15 years. In 2021, those assets totaled $1.6 million. Marcus knew this. He had always known this. The question, which I did not fully understand until much later, was how long he had been planning what to do with the knowledge. Marcus came to me in September 2021. He was 38 years old, my son, with June's eyes and a confidence that had always been slightly louder than the room required. He worked in commercial real estate development, mid-scale projects, industrial parks, mixed-use residential. He was good at it. He had a partner, Ray Kowalski, who was quieter and more methodical, and who balanced Marcus's energy in the way that good partnerships do. The pitch was professional. PowerPoint slides. A project summary. 3 years of financials. The company was called Meridian Property Group. Marcus and Ray each held 40%. 20% was held by a silent investor who was exiting. Marcus wanted me to buy in at that 20%, $320,000, and join the company as a non-executive board member. You'd have a real stake, Dad, Marcus said, not just savings sitting in an account. I asked Patricia to review the documents. She took a week, came back with 7 pages of notes. It's a legitimate company, she said. Solid revenue. The exit by the other investor is clean. He's taking a profit, not running from a loss. Should I do it? She looked at me over her reading glasses. That depends on whether you trust your son. I did. In September 2021, I did. I signed the shareholder agreement on a Wednesday afternoon and wrote the check the following Monday. Marcus framed the signed agreement. I saw it on his office wall the following Christmas. I would see it differently later. My daughter-in-law Simone is 35 years old. She has the kind of intelligence that presents itself as warmth. She makes people feel seen and understood, right up until the moment the warmth is no longer useful. I don't say this with bitterness. It took me longer than it should have to see it. June would have seen it in the first 5 minutes. The first signs came in early 2022. Small things. The way Simone would redirect conversations about the company when I entered the room. The way Marcus started answering my questions about quarterly performance with summaries rather than documents. The Q3 numbers look strong, he'd say. I'll send you the breakdown. He never sent the breakdown. By summer 2022, I had stopped receiving meeting notices. I asked Marcus about it in August, over lunch at a restaurant on Jasper Avenue. He said it had been an administrative oversight, that his assistant was new and hadn't updated the distribution list. I nodded and said nothing. Later that evening, I wrote the date in my notebook and the exact words he had used. But the first entry in that notebook, the one that started everything, was from March, not Marcus. Simone. We had been at their house for Sunday dinner. After the meal, while Marcus put the children to bed, Simone sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, in a voice calibrated to sound casual, "Douglas, have you ever thought about what you'd do if your memory started to slip? Not that it has. I just think about these things. As you get older." I looked at her. "Marcus worries," she said, still casual. "He doesn't say it, but I know him. He worries about people being taken advantage of, by advisors. Investment people. You know how it is," I said. "I've had the same attorney for 19 years. She smiled. "Of course. I just think it's good to have a plan, in case." I drove home and wrote March 4th. Simone. Memory. In case. I understood the entry's significance 6 months later, when Marcus's attorney's draft document landed on Patricia's desk. The language used to justify reclassifying my stake as inactive capital included a clause referencing the possibility that a shareholder's cognitive capacity to actively participate in board governance might warrant review. Simone had been laying the groundwork since March, not Marcus. Simone. The thing about Ray Kowalski is that he is a fundamentally decent man placed in proximity to an indecent plan. He came to my office. I still rented a small workspace downtown for consulting projects, on a Thursday in November 2022. He called first, said he was in the area, and wondered if I had 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes. He sat across from my desk and stirred his coffee for a long time without drinking it. Then he said, "Douglas, I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me how much you know." I told him to go ahead. "Marcus has been talking to a corporate attorney," Ray said, "about restructuring the shareholder agreement. He says you're a passive investor, and that the original agreement didn't properly account for the distinction between active and passive shareholders." I looked at him. "He's arguing that passive shareholders should be diluted when additional capital is raised. His attorney has drafted language that would reduce your stake from 20% to roughly 4%. He paused. "He hasn't told you?" "No," I said. "I found out because the attorney copied me on a chain he shouldn't have." Ray looked at his coffee. "I want you to know I didn't agree to this. I didn't know until last week." I believed him. "Still do. How long does he have before he can move on this?" I asked. "He'd need a board vote. 2 of 3 board members. He has himself. He'd need me." "Are you going to vote with him?" Ray looked up. "No." "Then you should go back to work," I said, "and let me handle this." He left. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. Patricia Holt has been my attorney for 19 years. She is 61 years old, methodical to the point of being almost mechanical, and she has never once given me advice I later wished I hadn't taken. She spent 6 weeks reviewing everything. What she found was not one thing. It was a sequence. In March 2022, Marcus had quietly begun exploring the conversion of Meridian from a partnership structure to a corporation, a move that would trigger a reevaluation of shareholder equity. He had not told me or Ray. In June 2022, the meeting notices I'd stopped receiving. Not an administrative error. The distribution list had been manually updated. My address had been removed by someone with administrator access to the company's project management system. Marcus was the only person with that access level. In October 2022, a document had been prepared, not yet filed, but prepared, proposing that the board formally classify my stake as inactive capital and reduce my voting rights accordingly. Patricia placed the document on the desk and pointed to a specific paragraph. The clause read, "Where a shareholder demonstrates limited active engagement, and there exists reasonable basis to question the shareholder's cognitive capacity to participate meaningfully in board governance, the board may recommend reclassification to non-voting advisory status, pending independent assessment." I read it twice. Cognitive capacity. I said. Yes, Patricia said. They were going to argue I was mentally unfit. They were building the predicate for it, she said. The exclusion from meetings, the lack of documentation you'd received. If they could show you'd been disengaged for 8 months, they could argue you weren't tracking your own stake. Combined with a family member willing to testify to concerns about your memory. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I thought about Simone at the kitchen table. Have you ever thought about what you'd do if your memory started to slip? That conversation had been the opening move, not speculation, architecture. He's been building toward this for 18 months, Patricia said, methodically. I said. Patricia looked at me. Simone, I said. Marcus executes. Simone architects. She slid 3 documents across the desk. A shareholder protection order, a formal notice of breach of fiduciary duty, and a request for full financial disclosure under your rights as a board member. She looked at me. Once these are filed, he can't move. I looked at the documents. He used June's name, I said. In the executive summary of the original shareholder agreement, this investment honors the legacy of June Whitaker. I remember thinking that was a kind gesture. Patricia said nothing. File them, I said. Patricia filed the 3 documents at 5:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November 2022. She called me at 6:20 p.m. to confirm. The board had been notified. Marcus had been notified. His attorney had already called her office. She'd let it go to voicemail. I went home, made dinner, ate it at the table by the window, washed the dishes. At 9:17 p.m. my phone rang. Marcus. I didn't answer. At 9:44 p.m. a text. Dad, we need to talk. Call me. At 10:31 p.m. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Patricia is overreacting. Please call me. At 11:58 p.m. Dad. At 2:38 a.m. Ray called. I answered that one. Marcus came to my apartment the following morning at 8 o'clock. I'd been expecting him. He was wearing a suit. He'd slept badly. I could see it in his face, the slight tremor around the jaw that he'd had since childhood, when something had gone wrong and he didn't yet know how to fix it. He was carrying 2 coffees from the place on 95th Street, which I recognized as a gesture he'd learned from Simone. Arrive with something. It changes the opening of the conversation. I took the coffee. Let him in. He sat on the couch. I sat in the chair by the window. Patricia filed without my knowledge, he said. Patricia is my attorney, I said. She files when I tell her to file. Dad, the restructuring I was looking at. It was a standard corporate conversion. Every company our size goes through it. He paused, and his voice dropped into the careful, slower register people use with someone they've decided can no longer keep up. These are complicated mechanisms, Dad. I don't expect you to have the full picture from a shareholder notification alone. You were going to be grandfathered, Marcus. He stopped. I have the document your attorney prepared, I said. The one that classifies my stake as inactive capital. The one that reduces my voting rights to advisory only. The one that was prepared in October and not shared with me or Ray. He was quiet. I also have the distribution list change from June, and I have the meeting minutes from 4 board meetings I was not invited to. He looked at his coffee. I wasn't trying to cut you out, he said, with less conviction than he'd started the sentence with. I know what you were trying to do, I said. I've known since November of last year. He looked up. I kept a notebook, I said. 23 entries before I called Patricia the first time, 61 entries after. The tremor in his jaw became more pronounced. What happens now? He said. Now you read the shareholder protection order, and get your own attorney, I said. And then we let the lawyers talk. 3 days after Marcus's visit, Simone called me. She didn't begin with Douglas. She began with Dad, which was itself information. She said Marcus was under enormous pressure. She said the company had grown faster than anticipated, and restructuring was genuinely necessary. She said I had perhaps misread the situation. She said she hoped I could approach this with some understanding of how difficult it is to run a business, since I had spent my career in the public sector. That last phrase, public sector, was delivered neutrally. But it wasn't neutral. It was a tap on the same nail she'd been hitting since March. You are old, you are slow, you are from a different world. And what you think you understand, you don't. I said, Simone, I understand exactly what was being planned. The documents are clear. She changed registers. I could hear it happen in real time, the warmth dialing back, efficiency coming forward. Attorneys find problems that don't exist, she said. That's how they justify their fees. Patricia has been advising you based on incomplete information. What information is she missing? A pause. The full context of Marcus's plans for the company, the growth strategy, the investor timeline. These things are nuanced, Douglas. They require understanding the business at an operational level. I'm a board member, I said. I have the right to that understanding. That's precisely what the filings require Marcus to provide. Another pause, longer. I hope you'll think carefully before making this adversarial, she said. For the sake of the children, if nothing else, there it was, the last instrument in the toolkit. The children have separate education accounts in their names, I said. Fully funded. Nothing that happens between Marcus and me touches them. I made sure of that in 2021, the same week I signed the shareholder agreement. Silence. Patricia's fees are justified, I said. Thank you for calling. I ended the call. Simone had not called to apologize or to understand. She'd called to find the last lever that still worked. When she found out there wasn't one, the call was over. I wrote that in the notebook. Entry 62. The formal board meeting was scheduled for January, 6 weeks after Patricia's filings. Marcus arrived with an attorney, a woman named Beckford, who was efficient and careful with her words. Patricia sat beside me. Ray sat across from Marcus. It lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. Marcus's attorney argued that the shareholder protection order was excessive, that the restructuring proposal had never been formally introduced to the board and constituted, at most, a preliminary internal discussion. Patricia presented the distribution list change, the removed meeting invitations, the October document, the communications log. There was a long silence after she finished. Then Beckford said, quietly, to Marcus, "We need to revisit our position." It was not a dramatic moment. These things rarely are, when they happen in a lawyer's conference room with fluorescent lights and bad coffee. It was simply the moment when the architecture of what Marcus had built became visible, to everyone in the room including Marcus. He didn't look at me during the meeting. Not once. Ray voted with me on the procedural remedies. Unanimous in the end. Here is what the next 8 months looked like. From my side of the window, Meridian Property Group completed a legitimate corporate restructuring, overseen by an independent auditor. My 20% stake was revalued, correctly at $490,000, higher than my original investment due to company growth. The documentation of the breach of fiduciary duty was placed on record. Marcus's role changed. He remained active but no longer held sole discretionary authority over corporate decisions. 2 external board members were added. Ray supported the changes. Marcus signed where he was told to sign. In September 2023, Marcus and Simone listed their house in Windermere. I don't know the details. I wasn't told. I read it in a real estate listing Ray mentioned in passing. A larger house than they needed, purchased in 2021 around the time they would have begun discussing what to do with my investment. The mortgage payments had become unsustainable. Once Marcus's discretionary authority over company funds was constrained. They moved to a townhouse in Summerside. It's 15 minutes further from the grandchildren's school. My grandchildren. Theo, who is 11, and Ren, who is 8. They are contained in none of this. By my specific design. The education accounts I established in their names in 2021. The same week I signed the shareholder agreement. Not a coincidence. are not accessible to Marcus or Simone. They never were. Theo called me on a Sunday in October to tell me he'd made the school chess team. I told him I wasn't surprised. He asked if I would come watch a match. I said yes. Ray Kowalski called me again in February 2024. A reasonable hour this time, a Tuesday afternoon. He said I wanted to check in. I told him I was fine, that the restructuring had settled, that Patricia had closed the main files. He said I keep thinking about that call, the 2:38 a.m. one. It was kind of you to try. I said, I almost didn't call, he said. I sat with it for 3 hours. I kept thinking, it's not my place, it'll make things worse. Marcus will find out. Then at some point I thought if someone was doing this to my father I'd want someone to call. I was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I said. I had already moved, but it mattered that you called. Did it? Yes, I said. It told me I'd read the situation correctly, that the man on the other end of that call had a conscience. That meant something. He was quiet. How's Marcus? I asked. Adjusting. Ray said carefully. The constraints are hard for him. He's not built for accountability from the outside. He prefers to supply his own. I know, I said. I raised him. We talked for a few more minutes. The company, a new project in Legic. The weather, before he hung up. Ray said, you never seemed angry. I wasn't angry, I said. What were you? I thought about it. Certain, I said. He laughed briefly. More exhale than laugh. That's the most frightening thing anyone's ever said to me. Good, I said. There is a photograph on the small table in my hallway. June and I at our 35th anniversary dinner. She is laughing at something I've just said. I'm watching her laugh. If you look at that photograph for long enough you can see everything we were to each other in that single unguarded moment. Below it on the table is a notebook. 62 entries. Entry 1, March 4th. Simone, memory. In case. Entry 62. She ran out of levers. I haven't put it away. It's a useful thing to have in a visible place, not as a reminder of what happened, as a reminder of what I almost let happen. Theo's first chess match is Saturday. I already have it in my calendar. Ren asked me last week if I would teach her to play. I said yes. I'm teaching her to think 3 moves ahead. She's 8 years old. She's already beating me. June would not be surprised. Neither am I.